Hi, Natalie Ewan. So we're going to talk about lessons learned. It's really important when we do a project that when we start, we think about those lessons that we've learned in previous projects, what went well, what didn't go so well, and how can we incorporate that into the current project to improve the likelihood of it succeeding and improve its performance. So we all know that if we continue doing the same thing, we'll get the same results. And this is true for when we do something well, but also when we do something poorly. So we need to really, we want to, replicate where we've done well and get more success out of that process, but we also want to avoid those mistakes. So that's why in a project we go through this lessons learned process. So it's really important when thinking about lessons learned that you incorporate a framework around it. We need to think about when are we going to do these lessons learned things, how are we going to do them, and who are we going to include in the process. So let's have a look at the when. So for most projects, that really only occurs in the closing stages when we do some kind of facilitated workshop to consider what went well in our project that we've just done, what didn't go so well, and capture those things. But the reality is that we should actually start with lessons learned. So we should look at initiating and planning and say, okay, well, in previous projects, what have we done well? What haven't we done well? In similar projects, what can we use out of those lessons as well? And then plan to incorporate some kind of process throughout the life cycle. So if you're a student and the project you're working on, for example, is an assessment, and that's part of a course, you don't want to wait right till the end of the course to think about how you went well or how you didn't do so well. You want to use feedback and so forth at the end of each assessment throughout that course and incorporate those lessons as we go along. And that's why it's really important to incorporate lessons learned throughout a project's life cycle, not just think about them at the end. Now, how do we do this? If we start in the slide in that middle column, the blue one, at the top there we've got this idea of a facilitated workshop, which, as I said, is the most common way projects deal with lessons learned, and they usually put that at the end of the project if it's a traditional project. For agile projects though, we can use this process at the end of each sprint as a retrospective, if you like, to really look at what those lessons were in that last little sprint and incorporate them back into the life cycle, into the project. And we want to do this in traditional projects too, so we can do that at the stage gate process. And as I said previously, we use usually the minutes of these facilitated workshops as our repository to collect these lessons learned, but they usually only get shared with the people in that workshop. We really need some kind of library to be able to share those lessons wider so that other projects can learn from them as well. On the left-hand side, we've got these ideas that are basically to help us identify lessons learned. So they're ways of categorizing. And you've got a Ishikawa or a fishbone diagram or cause and effect diagram up the top and a potty model down the bottom. And they simply do that. They're like prompts that we can use. On the right-hand side, we've got this idea of forms or templates, and they could be things like check sheets, lessons learned logs, or even surveys that help us gather that information around lessons learned. We can also do more individualistic things around our lessons learned, such as getting a mentor or doing some reflective journaling. So that's another thing that project managers don't always consider as a good process as well, but something that we should. Now, who should we include in this process? It really needs to be diverse. And for those who have looked at the PRINCE2 method of project management board structure, the user, sponsor and supplier represent the different stakeholders within a project. So I'm not going to go into everything that those three categories mean, but it really needs to be diverse. So you want voices and lessons coming from a whole heap of different stakeholders. So some common issues around this Lessons Learnt project, if we use that common model of this simply doing a facilitated workshop at the end, we get these issues of things like follow the leader, where everyone in the room doesn't want to upset the executive in the room or the sponsor, and they just follow their lead. They agree with what they say are the lessons and how it went and so forth. The other thing we can come across is this idea of the loudest voice, and that's that one person who really takes over the meeting and again makes people not feel very comfortable to share their voice, and we miss quite a few of those lessons learned if we do that. Over the other side, we've got this idea where there's no structure, so we don't think about the when, how and who of the whole process, and it becomes a bit of a wish-wash. Also, as we said, we don't have a really good repository or library to capture and share those lessons learned. So there's some of the common issues that we need to consider. So we've just learned about the importance of having a structure or a framework around our lessons learned project, the real need to make sure that there's diverse input into this. So we do have tools and techniques about capturing the individual lessons learnt, but we want to go wider than that. Just like a student goes to the tutor for feedback over how they've performed, we need to do that in projects as well. So, and continuous, it's a continuous process. We're going to continuously learn and input that learning into what it is we're doing. So now I want you guys to think of a project that you've been a part of and think about, well, how did you identify, capture and use the lessons that you learnt through that process? There are my details. Feel free to get in touch. Thank you.